when I create slides, I have a sense of how much space we have. And so, I mean, there's quite a few things that will be through that people do.
And you are good to go.
Okay. All right. So, do you want to say anything, or you
want me to welcome us in?
Yes, welcome us in.
I apologize for the delay.
Yeah.
You were recording.
All right. Can you all hear me?
No.
One more technical issue.
Okay, now you should be able to hear me. Perfect. Thank you. We apologize for the late start. We had a little technical difficulties as we usually do with technology, but we thank you for being here, and we're going to start our presentation off with Miss Ann McCall, who is going to give you a little bit of a history lesson about Gene's teachers in North Carolina.
Hey, everybody. It's nice to see all of you here scattered around the room. I'm just going to imagine that there's actually like 500 of you getting all this information, so it doesn't feel a little weird sometimes when you look out and it's so scattered, but we will move ahead. So this is actually flash history that we're going to be doing here, because I'm going to take as little time as I can to give you some context for what you're going to be hearing. And I just want to brag for a minute on the folks here, because we talk a lot, and certainly this whole session, the whole conference today is around how you take the past and bring it meaningfully forward. And that's what this group has done. And so I'm going to show you the history. But the process that I hope you'll notice is that there's been a process of taking that history, deeply thinking about it, and figuring out how to move it forward and turn it into a program now to address the issues we see now. So hear the history, and I also want to invite you that this is one program, and it's an awesome program, but we can be reinventing history all the time. And so what I want to invite into the room with you are the Genes teachers. This is the best photo of them, and it's actually our only photo. And I think if you flip the slide, we'll get even a closer look at them. Or maybe farther away. So as they're getting that, let me say something about this photo. So this is the best photo of the Genes teachers. It's actually also our only one. But you'll notice it's a formal picture, and you see how they have signed their names to it. And you can actually see the different colors of ink. So you can imagine that this was an event where people are, it's almost kind of yearbookish, right? Like we care about this event. We're all together. We're signing our names. And so these people can be in this room with us. And I invite them into this space with us as we try and learn more about who they are. And I'm going to share a little bit about a few of them. But before we get into that history, I want to give you a little bit of context. And I think we've heard a lot today about having context. Now, to get to that, we'll need to get to another slide. And how are we doing with the slides at this point? So I'm going to pause for a second. For folks who are listening online, just know we're checking out our oh, look at this.
Yeah, that's the close-up.
Okay, so now there's their close-up. And while we're getting ready for the next slide, you can just be kind of looking at them. And here we are. Okay. So it's scrolling instead of toggling. That's our technology for today. So this may seem like an odd place to start in talking about educators, Genes teachers, but it actually is a really important part of the context. And this is in part a story here of progress and success. And what I am wanting to point out in this slide is the level of Black male voting that is occurring in the 1880s through 1896. It's high. They are successfully getting to the polls and voting electing people, and even holding office. So part of what we've heard already today is when there is this kind of success, there is backlash, right? And that's a backlash that we see coming into the turn of the century. The Wilmington coup d'etat is a major backlash. You may have heard of it more recently as it's likened to the January 6th insurrection as the only coup d'etat in American history where an elected government is overthrown, people are murdered. That is the press of for the black newspaper that is being burned down. The literacy test is implemented in North Carolina in 1900, and we plummet to literally 0% of black males voting. Now, this is in part because of what's in the laws. It's also the terrorism and the violence that you've heard about. And it also has to do with the level of discretion given to white officials in managing voting. So again, you've heard a lot today around how history loops. That's one of the loops. And we also see that pattern in lots of places. So when we look at the difference in appropriations for black and white students at this time period, this has to do with that discretion to continue the white supremacy. North Carolina used to pride itself on having fewer Jim Crow laws on the books. The reality is we had fewer Jim Crow laws on the books because we didn't need them because there was so much white discretion that was being implemented in North Carolina. Not surprisingly, I was just showing you the appropriations for 1910. This is the beginning also of the NAACP that's going to take this on as a legal strategy. W.E.B. Du Bois is joining the effort. And it's focused on the Equal Protection Amendment, of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. And you know this story. We've heard it some today of Thurgood Marshall and others as a strategy that culminates in the Brown versus Board decision. That's the legal strategy. But there's a lot of other things going on, and this is the context for the genes teacher. So I want to get into a little bit more of that. And again, it starts with thinking of this as a symbol, the percentage of black males voting as a symbol of some thriving that is going on. There are other signs of some thriving that is going on despite the Jim Crow South. So Booker T. Washington takes a tour in North Carolina in 1910 to highlight all the success that's happening in this rising middle class of blacks. And we have these rallies attended by blacks and whites, 55,000 people come to these. And what he's doing on this tour is he wants to show all the success that's happening. And so if you look at this list, you'll see he actually starts in Charlotte with AME Zion Bishop, George Wiley Clinton. You'll see the Livingston College, NC Agriculture and Technical College, Black Wall Street, reflected by North Carolina Mutual Life in Durham, what becomes NC Central. I mean, so it's a real sign of the progress that has been made in spite of Jim Crow. Now, one thing you don't see on here, if you're looking, is the names of women. So I want to note that as we think about what's happening, there is a layer that's happening that is even more invisible in the majority culture than what black men are doing, and it is what black women are doing. And here's just some of the kind of organizations that are started. Association of Colored Women's Clubs in 1896. North Carolina creates a statewide federation that links up to this in 1902. We have these other groups. And Marie Clinton, the second wife of Wiley Clinton, she's the president of the statewide federation. She should be on that map too. So this is important because as we go into the Genes Teachers program that I'm going to describe didn't just kind of drop into North Carolina. This is what it's coming to. It's coming to a group of women who are deeply networked, already involved in clubs, already involved in their communities. And so Anna Jeans is a Philadelphia Quaker woman. And in 1907, she calls to her home Booker T. Washington and Mr. Frizzell from Hampton Institute, and explains to them that she wants to give $1 million, which in today's terms would be $30 million, to the advancement of the schools for blacks in the South. But she doesn't want to give it to their organizations. She doesn't want to give it to the Hampton Institute. She doesn't want to give it to Tuskegee. She wants to give it to black educators who are going to go into the schools. She dies about 6 months later, and Booker T. Washington and Hollis Brooke Frizzell are the ones who organize now the foundation under her name. And look at some of the people that they bring on at the beginning. Sitting president of the United States, Carnegie, Peabody, is quite a group. And we have George Wiley Clinton, the AME Zion Bishop, who is joining the board along with the president of Duke. So North Carolina has a strong presence. Now, we often have a little worry or a big worry when we see Northern philanthropy, white Northern philanthropy coming in to the South for the level of control. And I'm not going to say that there's not some levels of control here, but I want to point out something that's pretty unique about this Dean's program. There was a sense that what they wanted was for Black educators to go in and see what needed to be done and take that action. So that's in the letter given to Jean's teachers in 1911. So you'll notice we're kind of continuing to pivot around that date. They say, our desire is for you to do whatever you can do for school and neighborhood improvement. Kind and method of work best suited to one place may not be suitable in another. They are expecting that these leaders in Black education are going to go and find different things that need to be done. Now, the first Dean's teacher is out of Virginia, and I just want to share a couple of quotes that are famous in reflecting on her work. Here was a teacher who thought of her work in terms of the welfare of the whole community and of the school as an agency to help the people live better. That's often now referred to as Jeanism, this idea that we're going to connect deeply community and the schools and their, I might say, thriving students, thriving community, but that concept, that came a long time ago with the Jean's teachers. And I also want to read this quote to you. Patience and faith, tact, kindliness, good humor, a humility that shows itself in her willingness to learn from others, and a quiet tenacity of purposes that overcomes all difficulties. Those were the traits attributed to her and what they saw as important in this program. And I think this is one of those places that's worthy of a pause, that all of us have found it useful to have tact and diplomacy. My career as a lawyer, I would like to think that there were times that I used tact and diplomacy to improve opportunities for my client. But there is a Jim Crow South here to this, isn't there? And so the idea of needing to use tact and diplomacy. And when you saw that picture of the Jean's teachers, so mostly women, right? They were, if you were able to see it closely, there were actually two, I believe, Black men in the back. There's a reason for that. There may be other reasons outside of this program, but it was believed that Black women could work in a space that otherwise wasn't available, and that they could come in and make a difference. So let's look at North Carolina before I turn this over. One is Annie Wealthy Holland. She starts in North Carolina as in Gates County, northeastern North Carolina, came in from Virginia. She's the first in her family to have not been enslaved at birth. She had been a teacher and a principal in Virginia. She comes in as a Jean's teacher. She is so committed to the concepts of Jeanism, that connection between the teacher, the student, the school, the community, that she joins the Department of Public Instruction and runs this program. Part of what she wants to do is extend the reach of this program. She wants to get more people involved in Jean's teachers. And the way you do that is you convince the local white superintendent to take advantage of the grant funding and hire Jean's teacher for their community. So what she did is she wrote a letter to all the superintendents in the state to ask for that help. And I have asked, I keep thinking I can change my slide. If we can move the slides. There's a lot of information that you can
all
go.
the things that we just talked about.
All the things that we just talked about. Okay, so, all right. So you can go back to the slide previous to that. One more, let's see. One more. There you go.
It's my turn, sorry. Hello, everyone. I'm going to be reading the letter from Annie Holland to the white superintendent. Dear sir, I appreciate the deep interest you have manifested in the education of the colored boys and girls under your jurisdiction. Your employment of a Jean supervisor clearly demonstrates this fact.
I believe your educational vision for the future of our people is unexcelled by any group of men in the state. I am anxious that other superintendents who perhaps have not caught the vision may know something of the value of your genes workers. I am therefore writing to ask if you will kindly write me a statement evaluating the services of your genes supervisor. I believe a word from you will mean a great deal to the division of Negro education. Thanking you, I am yours for service, Mrs. A.W. Holland, Supervisor, Elementary Schools.
Thank you. And so I'm just going to share a couple of the letters out of the file. So the first one is from Bertie County.
All right, so I will be reading Herbert Early from Bertie County, the superintendent. Dear Madam, 15 years ago, the Board of Education of Bertie County employed for the first time a gene supervisor. Her work was helpful in so many ways that the board has not hesitated to employ a supervisor every year since then. The work of the supervisor has been especially helpful in assisting the county superintendent in the employment of teachers, in raising money to build schoolhouses, in prompting health work, in organizing and directing the work of community clubs, and in the teacher training work. In my opinion, every county in the state has a large Negro population By all means, employ a supervisor.
So that's one of our small systems. We also have it, and we can move the slide, to Wake County schools.
Dear Madam, I consider this very valuable and almost, is this the correct letter? Yes, almost indispensable in the promotion of our plans for the improvement of schools for Negroes. The Gene Supervisor has rendered valuable service in improving the standard of teachers as relates to scholarship, professional attitude, classroom teaching, and community service. The supervisor has always cooperated fully with me in carrying into effect plans for the improvement of the schools and has been successful in securing the hearty cooperation of the teachers in the county.
So
Yours truly, very truly yours, John C. Lockhart, Superintendent.
So she does this across the state. And we can thank Annie Welty Holland for the fact that North Carolina had the second largest number of genes teachers anywhere in the country. And it might, one of those questions that we will leave with you on this is, if the superintendents found this so valuable that every county should have a genes teacher, what happened to these genes teachers? So next slide. So I want to tell you about one more genes teacher, and she's Carrie Jordan. She's from Durham. She was born in Atlanta. Her father was the pastor of the oldest African-American church in Atlanta. And she comes to Durham. She's college educated. Her husband is a lawyer and a professor at what becomes NC Central, and she is the genes teacher for Durham. She lives in the Hayti community, and she is deeply engaged in her work. Next slide. You may hear a little bit more about Carrie from the panelists, but I just want to do one set of quotes out of this one report that she wrote. So again, remembering that context, that genes teachers were told, go and do, see what you think needs to be done, and you have the authority to go and see what can be done. So the first part of this little subsection of her 7-page report, we found many of the schoolhouses in such poor condition that they really were unfit for use. So one of the things that genes teachers did is they went out and they assessed. They evaluated what was available to the students in her community. That's a leader role, right? Also think about what this means, that she is traveling across Durham in the Jim Crow South by herself. There's a little courage and bravery in that, don't you think? Second paragraph, by explaining to the patrons in these communities the splendid offer of Mr. Rosenwald to assist them in obtaining new buildings, much interest was aroused. So many of you have probably heard of Rosenwald schools. They were, I'm not saying that the history is without any blemishes, but it was an extraordinary accomplishment to get some better quality schools than the terribly dilapidated schools that were in the white school systems. North Carolina has the most Rosenwald schools of any state in the country. How did that happen? because of the genes teachers. They're going out, explaining what that opportunity is, encouraging communities to do this. In modern day terms, we might call that community organizing. Last quote. Of course, it has meant hard work, many community meetings on weekends, and evenings with quite a few education rallies held on Sundays. So what's the job of a teacher? What can we learn from this deeply embedded in community version of education that is exemplified by these genes teachers? And it is this sort of report that really led us to wanting to start to brainstorm. What is it that they are doing? What's the culture in the Black community that we want to build on? What's missing in our current education system that this might help us address? Next slide. Or maybe there's not a next slide. So we will stop here. But the last slide was actually the slide of the teachers, that group of teachers again, because each of them would tell you a different story, because there was one teacher in each county, and each of them did something differently. And the only way to really fully understand their impact is actually to understand each one of their stories. And I think that we still have some work to do on that, but what's really exciting is what you've already done with the materials.
So we're going to switch a little bit, and we're going to talk about what we're doing today. So as Jeans, as Ann mentioned, these women did a lot of great work in rural North Carolina and in the South. And what we are trying to do with this new program is, how do we replicate that? How do we take the elements that work so well from this Gene Supervisor model and put this into schools today? And so when the presentation comes up, we're going to start. We have re-envisioned this. And so we have taken what these women did in the early 1900s. So if you can share the first slide. Well, while they're getting that together, I'm just going to talk about the earlier parts of this. There we go. So next slide, please. It's not letting you toggle through it again. We apologize, y'all. Technical difficulties. We're going to get there. So these women were in the early 1900s in Jim Crow South. So what does that mean? I think it's important to give context to anything that we do. So when we talk about the Jim Crow South, we talk about a lot of violence, and a lot of violence around education. So you talk about people who are wanting to vote, who are wanting to learn. We still have people who do not know how to read and who are learning to read in secret. So just think about that in context of what we're talking about. These women are doing important, innovative things in a time when they are likely to lose their life for what they are doing. I always think it's important to realize what you're talking about and who is involved. So in the next slides, in the next couple of slides, we're going to see how we broke this down. So the next slide, you see that these women were funded through a fund. So Anna T. Jeans was a Quaker white woman who invested into this program. She gave $1 million to start this fund. And $1 million today, honestly, is not that much when you think about starting a program, when you think about sustainability. But $1 million back in the early 1900s from a white woman to fund Black women to go into Black schools, that's a huge thing. And so with this money, they had some important tenets that they brought up. So in the next slide, we see that these women were all about curriculum development. Why is that important? Because we had students who were in schools who were lacking. They were under-resourced and underserved. Does that sound familiar? It should, because we have students who do not have books. They do not have teachers to teach certain subjects. They do not have an understanding of all of the different things and all the different elements that education could provide them. So these women really focused on providing that to their students. So they use this kind of basis of industrial education. And when we talk about industrial education, that means that they were basically making these students into factory workers, because that is what they thought that they could achieve. They could go work in a factory. And so that is what they taught them. These women believed they could do a lot more. They knew they had the potential to do what was outside of the box that they were put in. So they used that and they leveraged it. Okay, we can teach these students this. We're going to do it a little bit further, and we're going to do it a little bit better. So in the next slide, you see that the order in what they did that, they started doing teacher recruitment and development. So like we said, these women came in and they trained these teachers. They gave them curriculum development. They gave them support. They gave them PD. They knew that this was a huge element in providing the best education possible for their students. Does that sound familiar? All right. So in the next slide, another way that they did this, so all of the different elements that they included all had a strong community focus. So I don't know if how many of you are from the South or how many of you are from a very close-knit neighborhood, but my family, born and raised, half of my family is half of High Point, North Carolina. They all know my mother. If you see us in the street, that's probably my cousin. So when we talk about rural South, if you are Black or if you are white, there is a tight-knit community. And in the Black schools specifically, schools were the center of that community. Well-respected people were teachers. This was a highly sought-after job. And for Black women specifically, it's highly to point out that this was not a job that they did until they got married. This was a profession that they did while they raised their own children. And so when we talk about community involvement, community engagement, community informed everything that they did. We talk about Carrie Jordan or Carrie Jordan specifically. She knew that her students did not know what was outside of their town. She knew that they needed to know about the world. So one thing that she did is said, okay, well, my students need this. This is a need in my community. They need to know what's outside of here. She started raising funds for them to get curriculum to learn about geography, maps, magazines, things that they just did not have and weren't really thought about at the time. And it's also important to say that she raised those funds with the community. One narrative that we have a lot is that the poor kids, the kids of color, they don't want to learn. The community does not care about education. We're not going to continue that narrative because these women disprove that at every single facet. So when it comes to that model of the next needed thing on the next slide, that is what they did. They worked alongside the community leaders. They worked with their educators. They used their persuasive language and letters to superintendents, to other folks of power, to make sure that their students had what they needed, whether that was a community garden, whether that was curriculum around geography, whether that was literacy. These women went out and did what was needed to be done. But that strong community element was very present and very centered. You can skip the next slide and go to the next one. So when we talk about today, I hope you realize when we were talking about that, and this is just a small snippet of what we're talking about, but when we talk about education today, every single issue, every single need that they assessed or they addressed, we are still facing today. When we think about students in lower income backgrounds, from lower resource schools, or students of color specifically. They are not getting the education they need in order to meet the potential that they all have. That may not be the same potential, but they all have a potential that is greater than what we are currently giving them, unfortunately. So, North Carolina is in a really, really great place. Next slide, excuse me, I'm sorry. We are at a point where we have said, you know what? We know that. We've had 3 big events. We've had the Drive Task Force, which said we need teachers of colors in classrooms because we have an underrepresentation of teachers of color. We have a higher representation of students in schools. I think about 50% or so now, a population of students are students of color. But that is not represented when we talk about education or educators. So Drive is a momentum that we have. We also had the state board do their equity in education resolution. Now, this is a state board of education. This is who runs education in North Carolina. They have said that equity and providing for each and every student what they need is the priority. And if that wasn't enough, in 2019, we had the West Ed report. Now, if you do not know about Leandro, there are signs outside that I would encourage you to go and look at. We have Every Child in C in the back right here. And they are going to provide you some information about Leandro. It's an important court case. We are still fighting it today. But the gist of it says that North Carolina has a constitutional obligation to provide each and every student with a sound basic education. And they define what that means. However, but this report here, it lays out every single category in which we are lacking in education. And I promise you, if you go look at that report, every single area in which we are lacking is going to be the same thing that these women were doing back in the early 1900s. So this walk through history is not just a quote. It's not just something nice to say. We are currently living it. Next slide. So today, we want to re-envision what Jean's teachers were doing because we recognize that there's some secret in the sauce. There's a reason that these women were so successful. Next slide. So today, in our Modern Day Jean's Fellow program, which we have created, the Dudley Flood Center in partnership with Duke Tip, we've created this new partnership in which we want to create this fellowship for educators. We want to use it as a recruitment advantage, a retention advantage, but also we really want to make sure that there is this community tie, that we are really centering community and equity in education. Because who are we preparing these students to go work for? Our communities. Who are we preparing them to be when they grow up? Leaders in our community. So there has to be a community tie. And also we have to empower our teachers to be a part of that community, not just coming to a school building every day and thinking that's enough. And I'm not saying that they need to be social workers, but there is a strength and a power in knowing the community in which you work and being able to say you have worked alongside your community to provide what they need, because how do you know what they need unless you've talked to them? So a part of that, back up one slide, I'm so sorry. A part of that is going to be this cohort model. So we have about 6 districts right now who have invested in the Jean's Fellows model. And they are going to send 6 folks from their central office, and they're going to be a part of our fellowship. They're going to be engaged in PD, which they'll center around teacher leadership, making meaningful community connections. And also, they're going to be providing ongoing professional learning for their district. So whatever they learn from us, they're going to take that back into their district, and they're going to help their district implement strategic, equitable initiatives to address some issue of education and community. And so, next slide. When we talk about a Jean's Fellow, these are the elements that we want to see. We want to be focused. We want to have strategic leaders who are really invested in collaboration, and not just kind of a display of the collaboration, but we really want them to be involved in the community. And so those are the elements of those 6 folks that we're going to have. They have strong ties to the community, and they're going to help strengthen the community and school ties. Next slide. So there are some benefits to this, and not just because I'm talking about it, not just because I believe in it, but because they're actual real benefits. So there is power in professional learning opportunities. Our teachers are craving them. They don't have time for them, but they're craving them. They want to be great. So why not allow them to do that? Provide them with what they need. So a part of this fellowship is they will have monthly professional learning opportunities in which we're going to learn about how do you strategic plan? How do you do that with an equity lens at the forefocus? How do we build and maintain and sustain community partnerships? Not just going to them when we need something for us, but also making this a partnership that we provide what they need as well, and that they're involved in our decisions. Another benefit is going to be that community partnership. Schools thrive when they are connected to community. When you have parent involvement, when you have community leaders involved in what you need, you get to provide what you need to students. One example, so I was a social worker in Alamance, Burlington County. We had a school weekend food program. How did I manage that? We had a partnership with a community church, and they brought food to us every day, and they provided to students on the weekends. When they were leaving, if they had food, if they needed food, we had it to provide. Honestly, there were some students who took it because it was there, and not that they really didn't need it, but providing each and every student what they need. Maybe they just needed extra food. It's not necessarily just to target students who are lesser served, but it's also making sure that every student understands what is needed and their basic needs are met. So another benefit that we're going to talk about is just how recruitment and retention strategies. So along with this fellowship comes a stipend. We all know that our teachers are underpaid. That's my opinion, not the Dudley Flood's opinion. Just put that out there. But we know our teachers need more money. There's been a conversation that we've talked about for a long time. This is an incentive to get teachers in the door, but it's also an incentive to keep them, because one thing that we want to say with this fellowship program is that we just don't want to do it for a year or 2 years. We want to make sure that this is something that is able to be kept in place and provide the funding for that. Also, in terms of the Equity Center and Strategic Thought Partnership. So one thing that we've learned about schools is that, again, all schools want to do good. They just do not have time. They don't have the resources. So if we can provide that through this fellowship, if we can help them build this equity lens, which we all need and we all want to get, and we all want to use in our work, then why not do that? And if we can be strategic in that and saying, we're not just going to plan a couple PDs here, send them to this training over here, but this is going to be a sustained effort that is going to be incorporated in every facet of the school, that's a huge benefit to our students and to our educators. So with that being said, that was a crash course. If you have any questions about the Jeans Fellowship that we're currently doing, please contact me later. I think my information is on the platform. You can also get it off of the Dudley Flood Center website. We can definitely talk to you more about that. But with that being said, I do also have two ladies up here who are going to provide a little bit of extra incentive for you all, because they're going to give their own perspectives. And we have a couple questions. I think we're going to do two, maybe one, just because we're running a little short on time. Two, maybe one. But we have Miss Eugenia here. She is from, well, actually, let me let her introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for answering back. I appreciate you. My name is Eugenia Floyd, and I am the 2021 Burroughs Welcome Fund North Carolina Teacher of the Year. And I am also a native of Chapel Hill, Carborough City Schools, born and raised, all up in there. And I am now, I'm not in the classroom this year, but I am an equity specialist for instructional equity for the Chapel Hill, Carborough City Schools.
Hello, you may have seen me in such films as earlier today. So, sorry, I'm a little bit loopy. It's been a long week. I am Keisha Bentley Edwards. I am an associate professor at Duke University, and I'm here also with the Samuel DuBois Cook Center on social equity. And I am happy to be here, and let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I do also want to point out that Ms. Floyd, she forgot to say that she is going to be our Jeans Fellow in Chapel Hill, Carborough City Schools. But I also want to point out something that's interesting about Chapel Hill, Carborough City Schools. I went to grad school in Chapel Hill, and I learned this when I was there. I bet y'all didn't know it, but Chapel Hill is one of the most well-resourced cities in school districts, but they have one of the largest achievement gaps, I think. Is it in the country?
Second in the nation.
In the country, yes. So again, this isn't all about what the perception is. So just to get started, so the Jeans teachers had this motto, the next needed thing. How does that motto relate to what is needed today, and how can we empower educators to do what is needed? I'm going to send that to you, Eugenia.
Thank you, Ashley. Well, one of the things I am a true believer of, and I think this can be said also about my fellow teachers of the year, especially in my 2021 cohort. Some of them are down there, right there. Wave, y'all. One of the things that I as an educator, I don't have the argument. I think that we agree that whenever we are doing the action items and making moves in our classrooms, one of the things I found in this new role is teachers move way faster than everyone else. And we're able to pivot so quickly because those babies are sitting right in front of us. And so when I think about Jeans teachers and the way that they literally pivot and they are involved, not just with the children, right? Those most precious gems, but they also are directly connected with families and communities and really making sure that we are using each other as a partnership so that our kids can thrive. I don't think that we can't be absent of each other. It can't just be me driving instruction. It has to be a community effort. And so when I think about them doing the next needed thing, you know, I think about the reading I just read with Ann Holland and how, you know, she was real finesse in that letter, y'all, like to the white superintendent. she really had a lot of great things to say about his genius and how wonderful he is and how no other superintendent is doing the thing that you're doing. And I think about, even as a state teacher of the year, how I have to have that conversation sometimes with folks and how it just slows down the process of what my kids need right now. But it was one of those things where, just like her, I'm going to do what I need to do for kids. I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure that we are getting the services and getting the things that we need. So even if that means I got to stroke an ego or two, we're going to make it happen for children. So that is the next needed thing. And in partnership with the community is vital.
Ms. Keisha, did you want to add anything?
Yes, when you were talking, and even when we were going through the slides, it made me think about my own grandmother and great grandmother. I'm from California, but my family, where I'm really from, is Alabama. And my grandmother used to always say, "Do what is necessary now." And I think that is a big part of it. You do what's necessary. And so with the genes teachers, you saw even on here, if I got to talk to this man, I'm going to do it. But it was also the way that they engaged with the community. If they had to pivot on their curriculum, they said, "Oh, they told us we need to do rote education." These kids are not interested in learning, just memorizing some words that have no relevance to their lives. Let's make our word problems relevant to farming, since they were often in rural communities. Let's make this, when we talk about culturally relevant curriculum, we're not just talking about race, we're actually talking about the context in which people live. And that's what we have to consider. The other thing is that, going back to my grandmother, of doing what's necessary now, we have to empower the teachers, the genes fellows or the genes supervisors. They were also empowered so that when they saw something wasn't working, you don't blame the kids. You say, "What can we do next?" And I think that's what is that next needed thing, is that you have to know where you are so that you can know what needs to be changed. You start working. If you don't have the landscape analysis, if you don't know what's going on, how are you going to make improvements? And we're not talking about incremental improvements. Our kids don't have that kind of time. I studied to do resilience work, and I'm a little fed up with resilience work. I don't feel like our kids have to be hardy. I don't feel like they have to have black girl magic. I think that what's necessary now is that we have to build the systems so that the systems can support them, so they don't have to be lucky. They don't have to beat the odds, as Dr. Cobb said. And they don't have to be fortunate that someone said, "You know what, I think you're special," which is what I benefited from. And trust me, my kids think I'm special, but I should not be, only a handful of the kids from my public school who have a PhD.